watching at home. I hope some of you are. Today we will be continuing our study of the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke. And what I want to do, since we're going to be mostly in the second chapter today, but since it's been several weeks, I want to refresh your memory about what happened in chapter 1. I find chapter 1 a fascinating chapter. You know, Luke names no fewer than 9 people in the first chapter. He names them by name. He mentions himself. He says, I myself have personally investigated all these things. And probably much of chapters 1 and 2 came from interviews with Mary. We think maybe Mary talked to Luke, or he talked to her, and got the nativity story. There's Theophilus, and you know the name Theophilus, to whom this book was written. Theophilus means lover of God. Lover of God, I love that. And then of course we have Herod the Great, who was not a lover of God. He was appointed king, and we'll talk more about him later. Then of course we have Zechariah the priest, who was old. We have Abijah, or the order of Abijah in the priesthood. We have Elizabeth, who was barren, couldn't have children. And then we have Gabriel, who was the messenger of God. Remember, he told Zechariah, I stand in the presence of God. Not only was he the messenger of God, he was in the inner circle of the angelic kingdom, if you will. And then, of course, we have Mary, who became the mother of the Son of God. Friends and relatives that are unnamed, but there are many of them that were at the house of Elizabeth and Zechariah. And then, of course, we have John, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, crying at his birth, I'm sure, and later crying in the wilderness. So those are the people that are in chapter 1, setting the stage for the story of Jesus. Now the time, Luke dates things. He tells us when things happened. And he says that in the days of King Herod. So while King Herod was king, these things came to pass. And then we also talks about timing with the temple duty that the priests had. They periodically would go to Jerusalem, I think it's about twice a year, and serve for a while, a week or 2 weeks or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how long. But they would serve in the temple every year. Because, and as I think I mentioned, there were a lot of priests. Anyone who was a descendant of Aaron was considered a priest. Well, you got to keep those priests busy, don't you? So they would cycle them through the temple to perform the sacrifices and all the other things that went on in the temple. So that was that's the background that we looked at several weeks ago. Now, today we're going to be looking at chapter 2, and I hope I can get to the 7th verse. I may not make it, because there's a lot of things I want to share with you. This is not going to be your typical nativity Bible study. I want to read to you the first 4 verses. It says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own ancestral town to register. So let's stop there. In those days, Caesar Augustus. Well, who was Caesar?
One moment. I didn't get that.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Well, maybe she's going to tell you.
Stop, Siri. Okay. All right. Wow. In those days, Caesar Augustus. Well, who was Caesar Augustus? His complete name was Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, or Octavian for short. He was adopted by Julius Caesar as his heir, as the heir of Julius Caesar. He gave himself the title Divi Filius, which means Son of God. He claimed to be the Son of God. He was sickly and pompous. He had a large nose, a weak chin, and high, wide-set cheekbones. He was the nephew, and as I said, adopted son of Julius Caesar. He had cunning and audacity. Upon learning that Julius Caesar named him the dictator's legal heir, he misappropriated vast public sums for his personal use, raised taxes, and decreed himself to be divi filius. Does that sound the least bit familiar? It does to me. To ensure he reigned as his uncle's undisputed heir, Octavian ordered the murder of Caesarion, Julius Caesar's illegitimate child, by Cleopatra. The new Roman Empire was now ruled by just one all-powerful man who believed himself to be the Son of God. All hail, Caesar Augustus. By the way, the word Augustus is not a name. It's a title. It would be like saying most august Caesar, revered Caesar and all that. By the time of Jesus, Augustus was 70 years old, erecting opulent buildings and temples throughout the empire. He had issued in the era we know today as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace that lasted some 200 years, despite internal uprising and civil wars and all manner of domestic issues. Nevertheless, the Roman world had peace for 200 years. That's important, isn't it, for the spread of the gospel? We find that Paul went anywhere in the Roman Empire without fear of marauders or enemies of Rome, war breaking out. It was the Pax Romana, it was the Roman peace. That's one of the reasons God chose that time to send Jesus. Back to Caesar Augustus, he had an admiration of the Jews and their strict adherence to their teachings. He appreciated the Jews, but he allowed Herod the Great to remain on the throne for 40 years. Politics. It was all about politics. And then we have, the other name we have in these first 4 verses is Quirinius, or some translations say Cyrenius. At the time of the Roman census, Quirinius was governor of Syria. A very prestigious position. Very. Verse 3 in the New International Version and King James mentions the first census when Quirinius was governor. Biblical critics have long held that this is a mistake in Luke's story, because the historical records show Quirinius being governor of Syria well after the birth of Christ, around 7 AD. So Luke must have been wrong. But there are 2 reasons why, as a result of modern archaeological discoveries, Luke was right, after all. It has recently come to light that Quirinius was governor of Syria more than once. It says, in looking at analyzing the Greek sentence structure as the verse, it appears that the meaning Luke is conveying is as follows. This was the census that took place when Quirinius was first governor of Syria. Interesting, isn't it? The more the Bible gets criticized and put down as being inaccurate, or I hear it all the time, oh, there's so many inaccuracies in the Bible. Oh, really? Well, name one. Inconsistencies. No. It's sometimes our understanding is inconsistent, but the Bible is not inconsistent or not in error. Now, something else critics have said, critics have long said people did not go to their ancestral hometowns to register. As a matter of fact, there is archaeological evidence that they did. And it had nothing to do with the Roman edicts to do so. The Romans didn't care. They just wanted their tax money, right? It was to confirm Jewish family lines and succession for purposes of real estate and other holdings. I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent here, but the Jewish people felt a a bond with their past, particularly their heritage, their ancestors. You know, it says Joseph was a descendant of David. I'm sure he was very proud of that. Even though it didn't result in power or wealth or anything else, I'm sure he was very proud to be a descendant of David. And the records of the Jews were very, very detailed about family lines. And I ask some of my Jewish friends every once in a while, I say, how do you know you're a Jew? They say, well, my parents were Jews. Well, how do they know they were Jews? And well, their parents. I mean, it was tradition says that they're Jews. They can't prove it from family records because guess what happened to all those family records? They literally went up in smoke during the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. All those old records were gone. So today, Jews have no idea which tribe they came from. No idea at all. Let's see here. So Joseph also went up. I love that. Joseph also went up. So let's continue. So Joseph also went up from a town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea to Bethlehem, the town of David. Well, he says Nazareth in Galilee. Why did he say Nazareth in Galilee? Well, I think because there might have been more than one Nazareth. Just like there was more than one Bethlehem. That's why he says this was the Bethlehem in Judea that he went to. And it says, because he belonged to the house and line of David. Bethlehem was considered David's hometown. And so he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Well, I want to unpack some of this. I don't want to just gloss over. But it's interesting, isn't it? Joseph and Mary ended up in Bethlehem, about 75 miles from Nazareth, and uphill most of the way, as a result of something with which we have become very familiar of late, an executive order. An executive order. The effect of which was to raise taxes. I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's nothing new under the sun, friends. There's just not. However, Caesar Augustus played right into God's hands when he issued that decree. This so-called Son of God was single-handedly responsible for the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy that declared the real Son of God would be born in Bethlehem. Would that all decrees, edicts, and legislation resulted in the accomplishment of God's will. Let that sink in for a minute. Here we find something as horrendous as a mass migration of people from one part of the country to the other. I'm sure it was expensive to do that. And for the purpose of being taxed. Now, nobody likes to pay taxes. They didn't then, and they don't now. But God took that and made it possible for Mary and Joseph to go to Bethlehem. Now, I don't know, does it say, I don't know if they realized that giving birth in Bethlehem was the fulfillment of prophecy. It doesn't say. I can imagine that as two newlyweds, in effect, and for all intents and purposes, they were married, by the way. Two newlyweds on this long journey. She's pregnant. I mean, do you suppose there were some short tempers along the way? Do you think that perhaps they're asking themselves, where are we going and why are we doing this? But in any case, Mary had evidently conceived shortly after the angel's visit, and her agreement to be the handmaiden of the Lord. And Mary and Joseph were legally married, but had not consummated the marriage